Welcome to this in-depth exploration of Carl Jung's theory of individuation. Today we'll examine the scientific principles behind how signs and symbols guide us towards psychological wholeness. Let's begin with a fundamental distinction that Jung made. He differentiated between signs and symbols, two very different types of representations in the human psyche. Signs are representations of things we already know consciously. They have a one-to-one correspondence with their referent. For example, a stop sign. We all know what a stop sign means. It's a conscious, known fact. The sign directly points to its meaning, cease motion at an intersection. Symbols, on the other hand, point toward something unknown, something that cannot be fully expressed in rational language. They carry unconscious content. Consider a mandala. This circular symbol appears across cultures. It doesn't have one fixed meaning. Instead, it points toward concepts of wholeness, integration, the cosmos. It carries layers of unconscious meaning. From an information theory standpoint, we can quantify this difference. Let's think about how much information signs versus symbols convey. For a sign, the information content is negative log base 2 of the probability. If a sign has a known meaning with high certainty, say 99%, the information is very low. That's only about 0.014 bits of information. The sign is essentially deterministic. For a symbol, we need to use entropy, which is the sum over all possible interpretations of probability times log of probability. A symbol has high entropy because it can mean many things. If a symbol has 16 to 64 possible interpretations with varying probabilities, its entropy could be 4 to 6 bits or even higher. This is orders of magnitude more information than a simple sign. Now let's explore the central concept of individuation. Individuation is Jung's term for the process of becoming a psychologically integrated individual. Individuation is the developmental process by which a person becomes a separate, indivisible unity or whole. It's the realization of one's deepest, truest S. Think of the psyche as a series of concentric circles. The outermost is the conscious ego. Then we have the personal unconscious containing our repressed memories and experiences. Deeper still is the collective unconscious with its archetypes. At the center is the self, the goal of individuation. You might ask, how long does this process of individuation actually take? Let's do a back-of-envelope calculation. Let's assume someone dedicates 1 hour per week to active inner work, therapy, dream analysis, meditation, journaling. That's 52 hours per year of focused psychological work. Jung suggested individuation typically takes decades, let's say 10 to 30 years for significant progress. Taking 20 years as a middle estimate, that's about 1,040 hours of total inner work. This is roughly equivalent to a master's degree in psychology in terms of time investment. A crucial part of individuation is confronting the shadow. The shadow is one of Jung's most important concepts. The shadow is the unconscious repository of traits, desires, and impulses that we've repressed or denied. These are parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. Think of it this way. Your conscious persona is what you present to the world. Nice, rational, controlled. But hidden in the shadow are the opposite traits. Aggression, irrationality, impulsiveness. These don't disappear. They lurk in the unconscious. An important mechanism related to the shadow is projection. We often see our own shadow traits in other people and react strongly to them. For example, someone who prides themselves on being honest might be extremely judgmental of liars. This intense reaction might indicate they're projecting their own unconscious capacity for dishonesty. Let's examine the neurological basis for shadow formation. Modern neuroscience provides some evidence for Jung's ideas about repression. The prefrontal cortex, our executive control center, can actively inhibit the amygdala, which processes emotional responses. This top-down inhibition is a neural mechanism for repression. Amygdala activation is inversely proportional to prefrontal cortex inhibition. When we repress emotions, we're essentially increasing prefrontal inhibition of limbic structures. But here's the problem. Maintaining this inhibition requires constant metabolic energy. Studies show that emotional suppression increases sympathetic nervous system activity and cortisol levels. Estimates suggest that active emotional regulation can consume up to 20% of baseline neuroglucose metabolism. That's a significant cognitive load. So how do we integrate the shadow? This is where symbols become crucial guides in the individuation process. Integration doesn't mean acting on every repressed impulse. It means consciously acknowledging these aspects exist within you without moral judgment. Imagine bringing the shadow and conscious mind together into a larger circle. This is the integrated S. You recognize your capacity for both light and dark, creation and destruction, love and hate. Symbols are the bridges between conscious and unconscious. They speak to both realms simultaneously, helping to bring unconscious content into awareness. Dreams are perhaps the most important source of symbols in Jung's psychology. Let's analyze how dreams function from a scientific perspective. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, prefrontal cortex activity significantly decreases, while limbic and visual association areas remain highly active. Prefrontal cortex activity during REM sleep drops to roughly 30% of waking levels. This reduced executive control allows unconscious material to surface. Dreams present symbolic content from the unconscious. Upon waking, the conscious mind can reflect on these symbols and extract meaning, facilitating the dialogue between conscious and unconscious. Let's work through a concrete example of shadow integration using a common dream symbol. Imagine you repeatedly dream of being chased by a terrifying monster through dark corridors. You're always running, always afraid. In Jungian analysis, the monster likely represents some aspect of your own shadow that you're running from. Perhaps it's your own anger, your sexuality, your ambition, or your vulnerability. Here's the key question Jung would ask. What happens in the dream if instead of running, you turn around and face the monster? Active imagination techniques involve consciously continuing the dream while awake and choosing to face the threatening figure. Often the monster transforms or reveals itself to be a source of power or wisdom. When you integrate a shadow aspect, the psychic energy that was used to keep it repressed becomes available for conscious use. This is experienced as increased vitality and creativity. Now let's discuss archetypes, which are central to Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and individuation. Archetypes are universal, archaic patterns and images that derive from the collective unconscious. They're not inherited ideas, but inherited possibilities for ideas. Major archetypes include the hero, the shadow, the anima, and animus representing contrasexual aspects, and the self at the center representing wholeness. From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, archetypes might represent genetically encoded cognitive structures shaped by natural selection. The probability of survival was proportional to quickly recognizing archetypal situations. Recognizing the predator, the nurturing mother, the threatening stranger, the protective leader. Over millions of years of human evolution, individuals who could quickly recognize and respond to these archetypal patterns had survival advantages. This selected for neural structures that predispose us to recognize these patterns. The self-archetype is the ultimate goal of the individuation process. Let's examine what Jung meant by the self. The self represents the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. It's the organizing principle that brings all the disparate parts into a unified whole. The self is often symbolized by mandalas, quaternities, or other symbols of completeness. This mandala represents the self as the center and circumference of the psyche. An important point. Individuation doesn't eliminate the ego. Rather, the ego becomes relativized. You realize the ego is just one part of a larger whole, not the center of everything. Mathematically, we might think of the self as the sum of all psychic contents, ego plus shadow plus anima, or animus plus all the other complexes and archetypes. You might wonder, can we actually measure progress in individuation? This is a challenge Jung himself acknowledged. Jung suggested several qualitative indicators. These include increased self-awareness, reduced projection, tolerance for ambiguity, and integration of opposites. One measurable indicator is reduced reactivity. If you're integrating your shadow, you'll notice you're less triggered by others who display those traits. Another indicator is increased ability to recall dreams and extract meaning from them. This shows improved communication between conscious and unconscious. A third indicator is growing comfort with paradox. You can hold contradictory truths simultaneously. You can be both strong and vulnerable, rational and emotional. We might create an integration index as the ratio of accepted traits to total traits. Someone fully individuated would approach 1, meaning they've consciously integrated all aspects of their personality. Jung emphasized that suffering plays a necessary role in the individuation process. Let's explore why. When life is going smoothly, we rarely examine our unconscious assumptions and patterns. Suffering, whether through loss, failure, illness, or crisis, breaks through our defenses and forces us to confront unconscious material. Think of it as a phase transition. The comfortable ego state is like a solid structure. Crisis is like applying heat and pressure. This forces a transformation into a new, more integrated state. Jung used alchemical metaphors extensively. Solve et coagula means dissolve and coagulate. The old structure must be dissolved through suffering before a new, more complete structure can crystallize. Let's examine how symbols facilitate transformation from a cognitive neuroscience perspective. When you contemplate a powerful symbol, functional MRI studies show activation across multiple brain networks. Visual processing, emotional centers, language areas, and memory systems all activate simultaneously. The cognitive load is the sum over all activated brain areas of activity times their functional weight. Symbols create high cognitive load by simultaneously engaging multiple systems. This simultaneous activation of multiple networks is precisely what facilitates insight and transformation. Connections form between previously separate domains of experience. Let's analyze a specific symbol that appears across cultures, the cross or quaternio. The cross represents the union of opposites. Vertical axis might represent spirit versus matter. Horizontal axis might represent thinking versus feeling. At the intersection is the integrated S. This quaternio appears across traditions: the Christian cross, the alchemical 4 elements, Buddhist mandalas, Native American medicine wheels. This suggests it taps into something archetypal. Jung identified 4 psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Full individuation requires developing all 4, not just your preferred functions. Here's an important question. If individuation leads to psychological wholeness and reduced suffering, why don't more people pursue it? Why is it so difficult? First, the ego resists its own relativization. The ego wants to remain the center of consciousness. Admitting it's just one part of a larger system feels threatening. Second, there's genuine fear of what you might find in the unconscious. The shadow contains material that was repressed for a reason. It can be disturbing to confront. Third, modern Western culture provides little support for this inner journey. We're oriented toward external achievement, not internal transformation. We might model the probability of successful individuation as proportional to support times motivation, divided by ego resistance times fear. All 4 factors matter. Let's discuss some practical methods for engaging in shadow work and facilitating individuation. Active imagination involves consciously engaging with unconscious content. You might continue a dream scenario while awake, or have an imaginal dialogue with a dream figure. Keep a dream journal. Upon waking, immediately record your dreams in as much detail as possible. Then analyze the symbols and ask what they might represent about your psyche. Notice when you have strong emotional reactions to others. Ask yourself, what is it about this person that bothers me so much? Might I possess that trait in my own shadow? Painting, writing, music, and other creative acts can help express unconscious content. Jung himself painted mandalas as a way of tracking his own individuation process. These 4 methods, dreams, art, projection work, and active imagination, all feed into the central process of integration. They provide different pathways to access and integrate unconscious material. Let's address the scientific status of these ideas. Jung's theories occupy an interesting position between neuroscience and humanities. Jung's strength is providing rich, detailed phenomenological descriptions of psychological experiences. His concepts help organize and make sense of subjective inner experiences. The challenge is that many of Jung's concepts are difficult to operationalize in ways that allow rigorous empirical testing. How do you objectively measure the self or individuation? However, modern neuroscience and psychology research does support some core Jungian ideas: the existence of unconscious processing, the importance of integrating emotional experience, the universality of certain cognitive patterns. If we had to estimate, perhaps 40 to 60% of Jung's core concepts have some empirical support, while others remain in the realm of useful metaphor rather than established fact. As we conclude, let's reflect on a fundamental paradox at the heart of Jung's theory. The paradox is this: becoming your true self requires recognizing that you are not just your egos. You must acknowledge you're part of something larger, both personally through your shadow and collectively through archetypes. You must expand your identity from the small circle of ego through the medium circle of personal unconscious to the large circle encompassing the collective unconscious to finally realize the self at the center. Individuation is simultaneously deeply personal. It's your unique journey, and transpersonal. It connects you to universal human patterns and the collective psyche. This is why symbols are so crucial. They can speak to both the personal and universal simultaneously. A symbol from your dream has personal meaning, but also taps into archetypal content. The fully individuated person is paradoxically both completely individual, fully themselves in a unique way, and completely universal, connected to the archetypal patterns that unite all humans. Let me leave you with some final thoughts on the practical implications of this theory. Remember, individuation is a lifelong process. There's no point where you've fully individuated and are done. It's an ongoing dialogue between conscious and unconscious. Every crisis, every moment of suffering is potentially an opportunity to integrate previously unconscious material and move toward greater wholeness. The goal is not to become perfect, but to become whole. This means accepting your flaws, limitations, and shadow aspects as part of who you are. Pay attention to the symbols that appear in your dreams, your art, and your life. They're communications from the unconscious, guiding you toward integration.